The stars looked different from the Zeltharian command station. They seemed smaller somehow, less important than the massive structure floating in the darkness ahead. The Nexus hung in space like a giant metal egg, its surface covered in strange lights that moved in patterns no human eye could follow. Minho Park pressed his face against the observation window and watched the prison turn slowly in the void. 3 years of his life had gone into building this thing. 3 years of sleepless nights, endless calculations, and arguments with alien engineers who thought humans were too primitive to understand dimensional physics. Beautiful, is it not? Admiral Vextar's voice made Minho turn around. The Zeltharian looked like a walking tree made of crystal, with branches that sparkled when he moved. His species had been building prisons for other races for over 1,000 years. "It's certainly big," Minho said in his careful English. The translator device in his ear would convert his words for the Admiral, but he still tried to speak clearly. Being the only human on the project meant everyone was always watching him for mistakes. Vextar made a sound like wind chimes, laughing. "Big? My young human friend, this is not merely big, this is perfection. The Nexus can hold any creature in the universe. Reality benders, star eaters, mind controllers, beings that exist in 17 dimensions at once. All of them will be powerless. Here." Other aliens filled the observation deck. Minho recognized most of them from the 3-year construction project. There was Crix, whose 6 arms had been useful for handling delicate equipment. Commander Zelt, whose species could see through solid matter and had helped check the prison's inner structure. Dr. Yenna, the psychic specialist who had designed the mental barriers. They had all worked together to create something that had never existed before, a prison that could adapt to any prisoner, no matter how strange or powerful. The Nexus would study whatever was put inside it and then create the perfect cage for that specific being. "The first transport arrives in 2 hours, announced a voice from across the room. Captain Morvek, the security chief, looked nervous despite his 4 eyes and armor-plated skin. "Vorthak the Star Eater will be our first guest." Minho felt his stomach turn cold. He had read the files on Vorthak. The creature had consumed 17 different suns, along with all the planets and billions of lives that had depended on them. It existed partly in normal space and partly in something else entirely, making it almost impossible to contain. "The dimensional locks will hold," Vextar said confidently. "Even Vorthak cannot escape folded space-time." Minho nodded but kept staring at the Nexus. Something bothered him about the way the lights moved across its surface. As the chief human engineer on the project, he had helped design those light patterns. They were supposed to be random, showing the prison systems running normally. But now they looked almost like they were trying to spell out words he could not read. "Dr. Park," called Dr. Yenna, floating over on her gas-filled mobility suit. Her species breathed methane instead of oxygen. "Are you satisfied with the final systems check?" Minho pulled out his datapad and scrolled through the last readings. Everything looked perfect. Power levels stable, dimensional anchors locked in place, containment fields at full strength. The prison was ready to hold the universe's worst criminals. "All systems show green," he reported. "The Nexus is ready for operation." But even as he said the words, something nagged at the back of his mind. 3 years of working on this project had taught him to trust his instincts about complex systems, and right now, his instincts were telling him something was wrong. The command center suddenly filled with alarm sounds. Red lights flashed across every surface as officers rushed to their stations. Captain Morvek's voice boomed over the communication system. "We have multiple breaches in sectors 7 through 12. Unknown ships are attacking the transport convoy." Through the observation window, Minho could see explosions in the distance. Small ships darted around the massive transport vessel like angry insects. The first prisoner transport was under attack. "Separatists," growled Admiral Vextar. "Vorthak's followers are trying to free their master before we can imprison him." The battle was brief but violent. The transport ship's shields held against the smaller attack vessels, but several explosions rocked the command station. Minho grabbed onto a support beam as the floor shook beneath his feet. Then something went very wrong with the dimensional stabilizers. Minho felt the air around him begin to twist. The walls seemed to bend inward and gravity pulled in 3 different directions at once. Emergency systems screamed warnings about dimensional cascade failure. The last thing he saw was Admiral Vextar reaching toward him with crystalline branches. Then the command station folded in on itself like paper and everything went dark. When the twisting sensation finally stopped, Minho found himself lying on cold metal, breathing air that tasted of electricity and fear. Red emergency lights cast, strange shadows on walls that curved in impossible directions. A mechanical voice spoke from hidden speakers. Prisoner 2847H detected. Species human. Beginning classification and containment procedures. Minho had built the perfect prison. Now he was trapped inside it. Minho woke up slowly, like swimming up from the bottom of a deep, dark lake. His head hurt, and something cold pressed against his cheek. When he opened his eyes, red lights blinked at him from the ceiling. The air smelled like burned metal, and something else he could not name. Prisoner 2847H, said a voice that sounded like it came from a computer. Species human. Threat level cannot determine. Moving to Sector 7 for evaluation. Minho tried to sit up, but his body felt heavy and strange. Wait, he said to the empty air. I am not a prisoner. I am Dr. Minho Park. I helped build this place. The voice did not answer. Instead, blue lights appeared on the floor, making a path down a long hallway. When Minho did not move, he felt something push him gently but firmly. The prison was forcing him to walk. The hallways of the Nexus looked different from the inside. During construction, they had seemed clean and logical. Now they felt alive, like walking through the belly of some giant beast. The walls curved in, ways that hurt to look at directly, and sometimes Minho could swear he heard breathing coming from behind the metal. Other prisoners watched him as he walked. Most stayed in their cells, but some pressed against the energy barriers that kept them locked up. They looked at him with eyes that belonged to nightmares. One creature had too many teeth. Another seemed to be made of shadow and starlight. A third had no face at all, just smooth skin where features should be. Fresh meat, whispered something with a voice like breaking glass. Been so long since we had fresh meat. Minho kept walking, trying not to look at the things that watched him, from their cells. He had read their files during the construction project. These were not ordinary criminals. These were beings that had destroyed planets, enslaved entire species, or driven civilizations mad with terror. Each one had been caught only after years of hunting by the galaxy's best law enforcement. The blue lights led him to a large open space that the architects had called the common area. It was supposed to be a place where prisoners could exercise and socialize under careful supervision. Now it looked like the waiting room of hell. Floating platforms hung at different levels, connected by bridges that seemed to exist only sometimes. Strange gravity made water flow upward in some places and sideways in others. The air shimmered with heat waves that made everything look like a dream, and everywhere the universe's worst criminals watched the new arrival. What have we here? The voice came from above. Minho looked up to see something that made his brain hurt to process. It was big and dark and seemed to exist in more dimensions than should be possible. When it moved, stars went out somewhere in the distance. Vorthak, Minho whispered. He had read about this creature so many times that seeing it felt like meeting a character from a story, except this character had eaten 17 solar systems and everyone living in them. You know my name, little thing, Vorthak said, and his voice was the sound of suns dying. How interesting. You smell of familiarity and fear, but mostly insignificance. Other prisoners began to gather around. Minho saw Keth Mori, who looked like a young Korean woman but whose eyes held the weight of dead civilizations. She had the power to change reality just by thinking about it. During her trial, she had turned the courthouse into a flower garden to prove her point. A human, Keth Mori said, walking closer. I have not seen one of your species before. You are smaller than I expected. Humans are weak, said another voice. This one belonged to Jihoon, who appeared to be a middle-aged Korean man in a simple prison uniform. But Minho knew better. Jihoon had been a military strategist who had convinced 3 different species to destroy themselves in wars that served no purpose except his amusement. Weak, perhaps, agreed a collection of writhing tentacles that spoke in unison. But curious. Why would they put something so fragile in here with us? The Whisper Collective had driven the entire Milax civilization insane in just 6 months. They had done it by whispering thoughts into people's minds, thoughts that grew and spread like a virus until entire planets were full of people who could not tell reality from nightmare. Minho looked around at the creatures surrounding him. Each one was a legend of terror, a being so dangerous that the combined forces of the galaxy had worked together just to capture them. And now they were all looking at him like he was some kind of interesting puzzle. "I helped build this place," he said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "I am an engineer, not a criminal." Vorthak made a sound like cosmic wind. "The prison's mind cannot tell the difference. To it, you are simply another thing to be contained." "The question is," said Kethmori, tilting her head like a curious bird, "what makes you dangerous enough to be here with us?" Minho looked at each of the nightmare creatures around him. Star-eaters, reality-benders, mind-breakers, and worse. They were all waiting for his answer, and he realized that his response might determine whether he lived through his first day in the universe's most dangerous prison. "I do not know," he said honestly. "But I built this place. Maybe that is enough." 3 months had passed since Minho first woke up in the Nexus, and the prison had become a different place. Not safer exactly, but somehow more organized. The constant fighting between prisoners had slowed down, and the guards had stopped finding bodies in the morning. Minho sat in what used to be an empty storage room, now converted into something like a meeting space. Around him, some of the universe's most dangerous criminals waited for him to speak. It was not a sight that would have made sense to anyone from the outside world. "The air recycling system in Sector 12 is breaking down again," Minho said, looking at his handmade notes. "The filters are getting clogged because the methane breathers keep releasing too much gas." Vorthak shifted in his corner, and reality bent slightly around him. "Why should we care about the air? Most of us do not even breathe." "Because the ones who do breathe are getting sick," Minho replied. "And when they get sick, they get angry. And when they get angry, they start fights. And when they start fights, the guards flood the sectors with knockout gas that affects everyone." Kethmori nodded slowly. She had taken to appearing as a young woman more often lately, though her eyes still held the depth of someone who could remake the world with a thought. "The human makes sense. We have all noticed the increase in security sweeps." "Can fix it," Minho continued, "but I need access to the maintenance tunnels in Sector 15. That means someone needs to distract the guards." "And what do we get in return?" asked Jihoon. The former war strategist had become something like Minho's lieutenant in these meetings, helping to coordinate the various factions. Better air means better health. Better health means less fighting. Less fighting means more freedom to move around the prison. More freedom means more opportunities to work on our real problems. The Whisper Collective rustled in their corner, tentacles moving in patterns that suggested deep thought. The small human thinks in long terms, unusual for such a short-lived species. Minho had learned not to take offense at comments like that. These beings measured time in centuries or millennia. To them, human lifespans were like mayfly existences. But that perspective gave him something they lacked: urgency. "I have been studying the prison systems," Minho said, pulling out a diagram he had sketched on the back of a food tray. "The Nexus adapts to contain whatever is put inside it, but it was designed by committee, dozens of different species, each with their own ideas about security." "Your point?" Vorthak's voice made the air vibrate. "Committee designs have weaknesses. They make compromises. They leave gaps where different systems do not talk to each other properly." Minho pointed to several spots on his crude diagram. "Look, here. The power distribution system was designed by the hegemony. The dimensional locks were built by the Crystalline Collective. The AI control system came from the machine worlds." Kethmori leaned forward, interested. "Different design philosophies." "Exactly. And they do not always work well together. The AI makes decisions based on threat assessment, But the threat assessment system was built by beings who had never encountered humans before. Because humans are new to the galactic community, Ji-hoon said, understanding dawning in his eyes. You are not in their databases. Right. The prison knows how to contain Star Eaters, reality benders, and mind controllers. But it has no idea what to do with someone whose biggest threat is asking the right questions and organizing people. The group fell silent as they considered this. Minho had spent months learning about each of them, understanding their powers and their weaknesses. But more importantly, he had learned something else. They were all incredibly lonely. Vorthak had been isolated for so long that he had forgotten what it was like to have a conversation that did not end in someone trying to kill him. Keth Mori had been feared by everyone she met for centuries. The Whisper Collective had been locked away from all other minds for decades. Ji-hoon had been surrounded by people who only saw him as a weapon. You want us to work together, said a new voice from the doorway. Soo-yeon entered the room, her form flickering between human appearance and something far more alien. She was another, reality bender, but unlike Keth Mori, she had been imprisoned for protecting her people rather than conquering others. I want us to help each other, Minho corrected. The prison system treats us all as individual threats, but what if we become something it cannot categorize? A collective, whispered the Whisper Collective, their tentacles writhing with excitement. But not a hive mind, something new. The guards are trained to handle lone prisoners trying to escape, Minho explained. They know how to stop someone from breaking out through force or special powers, but they have never dealt with prisoners who cooperate to improve their situation, rather than just fighting each other. Over the following weeks, small changes began to happen throughout the Nexus. Air quality improved. Food distribution became more efficient. Conflicts between different species decreased. The guards noticed but could not figure out what was causing the changes. Minho had not made the prison weaker. He had made it more stable. And in doing so, he had created something the builders had never anticipated. A community of the universe's most dangerous beings, working together under the guidance of a human engineer who understood that sometimes the best way to escape a trap was to first make it a place worth living in. The real escape would come later, but first they had to learn to trust each other. The maintenance tunnel under Sector 7 was not built for meetings, but it had become Minho's favorite place to think. The walls hummed with the prison's power, systems, and the air tasted of metal and electricity. Here, surrounded by the very systems he had helped design, he could work on the biggest puzzle of his life. This is madness, Keth Mori said, her human form flickering as she studied the complex diagram Minho had drawn on the tunnel wall. You want to trick the prison into letting us out by making it think we are not prisoners? Not exactly, Minho replied, adding another line to his drawing. I want to create a cascade failure in the classification system. The AI that runs this place has to categorize every prisoner to know how to contain them. But what happens when it cannot decide what something is? Vorthak's massive form barely fit in the tunnel, and his presence made the air feel thick and strange. The machine minds are logical. They do not suffer from confusion like organic beings. That is exactly the problem, Minho said, turning to face the Star Eater. Logic has rules, and rules can be broken if you know how they work. Ji-hoon crouched beside the diagram, his strategic mind already seeing the possibilities. You still have administrator access from the construction phase. Limited access, Minho corrected, but enough to create problems if I do it carefully. Look, every prisoner in here has a threat classification code. Vorthak is classified as a Cosmic Devourer, Class 9. Keth Mori is a Reality Manipulator, Class 8. The Whisper Collective is a Mental Contamination Risk, Class 7. And you? Asked Soo-yeon, who had been listening silently. That is the interesting part. I'm still classified as under review because the system has never encountered a human before. It keeps running analysis cycles trying to figure out what I am and how dangerous I might be. The Whisper Collective rustled in the darkness beyond the tunnel's lights. The small human creates uncertainty in the machine mind. Right. And I can use that uncertainty to create more uncertainty. If I start changing small things in the database, Adding conflicting information, the AI will have to resolve the conflicts. Minho pointed to different parts of his diagram. First, I create false records suggesting that some prisoners have been reformed. Not the dangerous ones like you, Vorthak, but some of the smaller threats. Prisoners who have been cooperative. The system will investigate, Jihoon said, following the logic. Yes. And while it is investigating, I create more conflicts. I suggest that some prisoners are actually prison staff who were misclassified. I add medical records indicating that some inmates are too sick to be dangerous. I create legal documents, suggesting that others have completed their sentences. Kithamori shook her head. The AI will see through such obvious lies. Not if they are not lies, Minho said with a small smile. That is the beautiful part. Some of the prisoners here really have changed. Look at us. We are having a peaceful meeting in a maintenance tunnel, working together to solve a problem. 3 months ago, half of you would have tried to kill the BAP, other half just for being in the same room. The group fell silent as they considered this. It was true. The constant violence that had marked the early days of their imprisonment had largely stopped. Prisoners who had been enemies for centuries were now trading favors and sharing resources. But the real trick, Minho continued, is not to fool the system. It is to make the system fool itself. I am going to create a situation where the AI has to choose between following its programming or maintaining the integrity of the prison. How? Vorthak asked. By making myself the key to the prison's operation. I have been fixing things, right? Improving air quality, organizing food distribution, preventing fights. The AI has been monitoring all of this. Its reports show that prison efficiency has improved by 30% since I started making changes. Suyon's eyes widened as she understood. You are making yourself necessary. Exactly. And then I am going to request a transfer to the administrative sector to help with prison operations. Just a small request, the kind that would make sense for someone who has been helping to run things. The AI will have to decide, Jihoon said slowly, whether you are a prisoner who needs to be contained or a resource that needs to be utilized. And while it is thinking about that, I will submit similar requests for all of you. Vorthak could help with power generation. His energy signature could boost the reactors. Kithamori could assist with dimensional maintenance. The Whisper Collective could help with communications between sectors. A prison run by its own prisoners, the Whisper Collective said, their voice filled with something that might have been amusement. The system will reject the requests, Kithamori protested. Maybe, but it will have to process them first. And while it is processing hundreds of conflicting requests and reclassification petitions, I will be introducing more chaos into the system. Error messages, conflicting priorities, logical loops that the AI cannot resolve. Minho stepped back from his diagram, looking at the complex web of plans and possibilities he had drawn on the tunnel wall. The Nexus was designed to be unbreakable, but every system has a breaking point. And sometimes the best way to break something is not to attack it directly, but to make it attack itself. The universe's most dangerous criminals looked at the human engineer with something approaching respect. He was not trying to overpower the prison or bend reality to his will. He was doing something far more subtle and perhaps more dangerous. He was thinking his way out. The alarm started at exactly 0347 hours prison time. Red lights flashed through every corridor of the Nexus as the AI's voice echoed from hidden speakers, repeating the same message over and over. System error. Classification protocols compromised. Emergency containment procedures activated. Minho stood in the central control room, his hands dancing across interfaces he had helped design 3 years ago. Around him, holographic displays showed the cascade of failures spreading through the prison systems like a virus. Every classification he had corrupted, every logical loop he had created, was now forcing the AI to make impossible choices. It is working, Jihoon said from beside him. The former strategist watched the tactical displays with professional appreciation. The system cannot decide what we are anymore. Throughout the prison, containment fields flickered and failed. Cell, Doors that had not opened in decades suddenly unlocked as the AI tried to reclassify their occupants. Prisoners who had been isolated for centuries found themselves able to walk freely through corridors, but there was no chaos, no stampede toward the exits, no bloodbath of revenge and violence. Instead, the universe's most dangerous criminals moved, with careful purpose, following plans they had made in secret meetings over the past weeks. Forthak flowed toward the power core, his massive form integrating with the energy systems to prevent a complete shutdown. Kethamori appeared in the dimensional anchor chambers, using her reality-bending abilities to keep the prison stable in folded space. Prisoner reclassification in progress, the AI announced, its voice now uncertain. Threat levels, unclear. Administrative override required. Minho smiled grimly and entered his old access codes. The system accepted them, recognizing him as Dr. Minho Park, Chief Engineer and Construction Supervisor. For a moment, he was not a prisoner but a member of the design team again. The Whisper Collective had positioned themselves at communication hubs throughout the prison, their collective mind interfacing directly with the data streams. Through them, Minho could monitor every system, every prisoner, every guard station. External security forces are mobilizing, they reported in their multi-layered voice. Zeltharian battle cruisers are moving to surround the prison. Minho nodded. He had expected this. The moment the Nexus started broadcasting error signals, every military force in the sector would converge on it. They could not risk the universe's worst criminals escaping. "How long do we have?" asked Suyon, who had taken control of the environmental systems. "Maybe an hour before they start shooting," Minho replied. "But that is not our biggest problem." He gestured to the main display, which showed the prison's structural integrity readings. The cascade failures were spreading beyond the classification systems. The dimensional anchors that kept the Nexus stable in folded space were beginning to fluctuate. "If those fail completely, the prison will collapse into normal space," Minho explained. "The explosion will destroy everything within a light-year radius." "Including us," Jihoon pointed out unnecessarily. Minho looked around at his unlikely allies. These beings had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. They had destroyed worlds, enslaved civilizations, and driven entire species to extinction. But over the past months, they had also learned to work together, to trust each other, to be something more than the sum of their individual hungers and hatreds. "We have a choice," he said finally. "We can try to escape. I can probably get the transportation systems working long enough to get some of us out, but not everyone, and those who escape will be hunted for the rest of their lives. Or?" Forthak's voice rumbled through the structure itself, as he had become partially merged with the power systems. "Or we finish what we started here. We do. Not just escape from the Nexus. We transform it." The control room fell silent except for the humming of machinery and the distant sound of alarms. Everyone understood what Minho was proposing, and the weight of it settled over them like a heavy blanket. "You want to turn the prison into something else," Kethamori said slowly. "Something that has never existed before. A place where beings like us can choose to become something better," Minho confirmed. "Not because we are forced to, but because we want to. Because we have learned that cooperation is more powerful than domination." The Whisper Collective rustled with something that might have been laughter. "The small human wants to create a school for monsters. I want to prove that monsters can learn to be something else," Minho replied. "But it has to be a choice. Anyone who wants to leave, who wants to go back to their old ways, can go. But those who stay will help build something new." He turned back to the control systems and began entering new commands. Not escape protocols, but transformation codes. The prison's adaptive systems began to shift, changing from containment to something unprecedented: rehabilitation through choice and community. Outside, the Zeltharian fleet prepared to destroy what they thought was a prison break. Inside, the universe's most dangerous criminals made the most dangerous choice of all. They chose to change. When Admiral Vexstar finally received Minho's transmission, the crystalline being could hardly believe what he was hearing. "This is Warden Park," the human said calmly. "The Nexus remains secure, but we need to discuss some changes to our operational procedures. Behind him, former Star Eaters worked alongside reality benders and mind controllers, building something the galaxy had never seen, a place where even monsters could find redemption. The real prison had been their certainty that they could never change. Breaking free from that had been worth the price.